Has it ever happened to you that during a conversation with your children, you suddenly realize they're not respecting you the way they used to? Maybe they make disparaging comments, constantly interrupt, raise their voices, or even ignore you completely when you try to express your point of view. It's a situation that hurts deeply because you expect understanding and consideration from the people you raised with so much love. However, today I want to tell you something important. Don't let anger take control. Instead of getting upset, there's another way forward. I'm going to share 6 ways to handle these situations that can help you restore a climate of mutual respect without falling into fights that only wear the relationship down further. First, let's recognize why it hurts so much when a child doesn't respect their parents. You raise your children hoping to see them grow up to be kind, caring, and supportive people. Over time, however, each one develops their own personality and faces conflicts that sometimes get taken out on those closest to them, their parents. Occasionally, the lack of respect isn't premeditated or malicious. It can stem from stress, frustration, the feeling that my parents don't understand my reality, or even from communication problems that have built up over the years. Whatever the cause, the result is painful for us as mothers or fathers because we feel sidelined, underestimated, or worse, mistreated. I know the most common reaction is to respond to this disrespect with anger. After all, it's an emotional assault. Your blood boils, you feel outraged, and you think, why is my own child talking to me like this? Have they forgotten everything I've done for them? And in the midst of that anger, heated arguments arise, accusations are thrown, sometimes there's yelling, and maybe we stop talking to each other for a while. But do we really want to get to that point? Personally, I've seen that anger is like a fire that only grows when we feed it with shouting and blame. Also, at our age, putting up with such intense stress can end up affecting our physical health. That's why the first step is to take a deep breath and consciously decide you're going to handle the situation differently. Before I share the 6 ways to regain your children's respect, I want you to keep one crucial point in mind. Even if your children's behavior seems unfair to you, there's almost always a backstory that's worth understanding. It could be that they're going through work problems, relationship issues, feeling financially pressured, or carrying old family wounds that were never openly addressed. Understanding doesn't mean justifying their disrespect, but it does give you a broader perspective on how to handle the situation. It's not about letting yourself be walked over. It's about talking from another standpoint, that of a mature adult who, without yelling or holding grudges, sets clear boundaries and aims for respectful communication. Having clarified that, let's move on to the 6 strategies that can help you. The first way to regain respect is to practice assertive, calm communication. The word assertive might sound strange, but it's actually very simple. It means expressing your feelings and needs clearly and firmly, without hurting the other person or letting them hurt you. When a child disrespects you, the natural reaction is usually to snap back with more shouting or bigger anger. However, that almost never fixes anything. It usually heightens the conflict. Imagine this scenario. Your child tells you in a harsh tone that you're interfering in things that aren't your business, that you no longer need to control their life. Instead of answering, "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that? I'm your father, mother, and you owe me respect." You could step back, take a deep breath, and respond, "I understand you're upset about something, but I'm not willing to continue talking if you raise your voice. I'd like us to speak calmly to figure out what's bothering you and how I can help, but yelling at me isn't the way to go." With that, you're not only setting a boundary, but also modeling the way you want to be treated, calmly and without attacks. It's easier for the other person to step back from the fight if they see you're not playing the game of shouting or insulting. Even if they continue in an aggressive tone, you hold your composure and assertive stance. You'll calmly repeat that you won't go on unless they can speak respectfully. The second way to regain respect is to establish clear boundaries. Being parents doesn't mean putting up with any kind of behavior, especially if we're talking about adult children. Even though they're our children, each person deserves and needs a framework of relationships where everyone knows what's acceptable and what isn't. Speaking to you rudely, insulting you, or belittling you definitely crosses a line. That's why it's important to communicate that firmly. Something like, "I love you very much, and I understand you're going through a rough time, but I'm not going to tolerate you yelling at me or talking down to me. If you do, I'll have to end the conversation until you can speak respectfully. It may sound drastic, but if we don't say enough, the child will think they can unleash their frustrations on the parent without any consequences. When you set a boundary with confidence, you're protecting your dignity and also sending a message. I do love you, I do want to help you, but my affection doesn't mean putting up with being treated badly. In many cases, that stops the disrespect from escalating because the other person sees there's no point in continuing with that tone. The third way is to practice active listening and empathy. It may seem contradictory, but sometimes disrespect happens because your child feels ignored, judged, or thinks you're not truly listening to them. Then they respond aggressively to vent all that frustration. Although it doesn't justify their behavior, it can give you a clue on how to improve the situation. Truly listening means paying attention to what they're saying without interrupting every moment. Ask questions to better understand their perspective. Why do you feel that way? Can you explain more about what's bothering you? Sometimes you'll be surprised to discover that behind rude behavior lies pain, insecurity, or even fears that they didn't know how to express. I recall a case where the son was very hurtful to his mother, but it turned out he was overwhelmed by debt and was afraid to confess it openly. Once he felt heard, he let down his guard, apologized, and the relationship eased. Again, this doesn't mean allowing disrespect, but it does mean seeing the root of the problem so you can address it. The fourth way to regain respect is to avoid long, repetitive lectures. I know that as parents, it's almost second nature to give life lessons, to repeat over and over why they should do this or that, how we did things back then, and so on. However, most adult children completely tune out when they feel that dad or mom is in lecture mode, especially if they've heard it 1,000 times. That reaction can put them on the defensive. Here we go again with the same old story, and their response is usually abrupt or dismissive. Even if your intentions are good, because you want to share your experience and help them avoid mistakes, maybe the way you're getting the message across isn't the most effective. It's better to speak briefly and directly, and only when you sense your child is open to listening. For example, you might say, I see you're going through a tough situation, and I'm willing to give you my opinion if you want it, but I don't want to force anything on you. Let me know if you'd like to hear my perspective. It sounds less overwhelming and allows your child to decide if they want your advice. Often, that freedom means that instead of shutting down, they pay more attention. And if they don't want advice at that moment, you respect their decision and avoid a never-ending monologue that turns into an argument. The fifth way is to give them space and respect their autonomy. Sometimes, without realizing it, we get too involved in our children's lives, offering opinions on every step they take, criticizing their choices, or making decisions for them. Even as parents, if our children are already adults with lives of their own, we can't control everything they do, nor should we try. When they sense we're attempting to direct their entire life, they can react with annoyance, which unfortunately can manifest as disrespect. Learn to let go a bit. Show interest, yes, but don't interrogate or impose. If you see your child making a mistake and they don't want to listen to you, let them go through their process. They might mess up, but people also learn from mistakes. Interestingly, when children see you're respecting their decisions, they often come to value you more because they realize you're not treating them like little kids. With that new sense of appreciation, a more respectful attitude toward you usually follows, because your children feel treated like the adults they are. The sixth way, and possibly the most important of all, is to strengthen your self-esteem and sense of personal dignity. Remember that even though you're a mother or father, you're still an individual with the right to feel valued and to enjoy life. If you neglect yourself and focus your entire existence on seeking your children's affection or approval, it's easy to end up allowing abusive dynamics or disrespect that should have no place in your life. That's why you should look for activities that fulfill you, maintain friendships, or join groups where you can share your interests. Learn something new if it excites you. Show in practice that your life doesn't revolve solely around your relationship with your children, but that you're still growing and have your own interests. Not only will this make you happier, but it also projects a different image to your children. They see you as a secure person, aware of your worth, and not someone who can be mistreated without consequences. That self-assurance is often crucial so that others, including your children, treat you with respect. So we have 6 ways to regain respect: communicating assertively, setting limits, practicing active listening, avoiding lectures, giving them space, and boosting your own self-esteem. Don't expect miracles overnight. Family relationships that have been strained for years may require time and patience to heal. It's possible that at first, your child will be taken aback if you suddenly stop reacting with anger and start speaking calmly and firmly. They might respond with skepticism or try to go back to the usual argument. But if you remain consistent, little by little, they'll realize something has changed and will have to adapt. Even so, sometimes it's hard to see an immediate change despite our best efforts. So I want to mention some common mistakes we tend to make when we're trying to regain respect. The first is falling into passive-aggressive behavior. You might tell yourself, "I won't yell at them," but at the same time, you start making sarcastic remarks, dropping hints, or giving the silent treatment for days. This doesn't improve the relationship, it just adds tension. The second mistake is comparing your child to someone else, such as a sibling or a cousin who does respect their parents, or referencing the past. "When I was your age, I would never have dreamed of talking to my father like that." That generally generates more resentment. The third is withdrawing affection as punishment by cutting off communication for weeks without a clear dialogue, which only broadens the gap and makes it harder to rebuild the relationship. And the fourth big mistake is expecting that, after a couple of conversations, the child will change radically. Remember that the relationship may have deteriorated over months or years, and rebuilding it may take consistent, ongoing effort. That's why, if you really want to regain your children's respect, it can also be helpful to focus on extra tips that maintain and strengthen the relationship. For example, try to create quality moments with them, beyond the conflicts. If the only times you get together are to argue or criticize, the relationship becomes purely negative. In contrast, even if there are tensions, you can propose going for a walk together, cooking something together, or reminiscing about positive family memories. Sometimes, reconnecting with pleasant memories or doing shared activities brings out the affection that was buried by arguments. Another key point is the practice of forgiveness. It doesn't mean turning a blind eye to offenses, but rather letting go of old resentments that may have piled up. When you forgive and convey that to your child, "I know we've had our differences, but I want to let go of that bitterness," you open the door to the possibility of a more genuine reunion. In cases where the relationship is very strained, don't rule out seeking external help. Sometimes a mediator, a family therapist, or a spiritual guide can direct the conversation so that neither of you feels attacked, and things can come to light in an orderly and respectful way. Maybe your child will resist going to therapy, but at least you can suggest it or go on your own to get emotional management tools you can later apply in your interactions with them. There are also support groups for parents going through similar situations, where people share experiences and give advice on how they overcame issues with disrespect from their children. Let me briefly recap the 6 strategies I've mentioned so they're clear and you can use them as a quick reference. First, assertive and calm communication. Don't get carried away by anger, but speak in a firm yet respectful tone. Second, establish clear boundaries, explaining that you won't tolerate yelling or insults and will stop the conversation if it happens. Third, active listening and empathy, showing interest in what your child is feeling or going through without rushing to judge. Fourth, avoid long, insistent lectures. Give advice only when they're open to it. Fifth, give them space and respect their autonomy, remembering that if they're adults, they need the freedom to make their own decisions and, at times, their own mistakes. Sixth, strengthen your own self-esteem so you can project dignity and avoid behaviors that make you feel inferior or too needy for their acceptance. Taken together, these steps can make a real difference, but only if you're consistent and commit to not falling back into old arguing habits. In fact, I encourage you to write down these guidelines on paper or review them mentally before a delicate conversation with your child. Think, today I'm going to be assertive, If they raise their voice, I'll set a boundary. I'll listen to their concerns. I'll be brief if I give advice, and I'll remember my own worth without begging for respect. That mental preparation can serve as your guide, especially in the beginning when you're not yet used to this new way of communicating. Now, I'd like to invite you to reflect. Have you already been in a situation where you needed these strategies? Have you found yourself shouting back at your child or feeling so hurt that you prefer to stay silent, leaving the issue unresolved? Feel free to share, because many people are going through the same thing, and it can be a relief to see they're not alone. If you found this topic helpful, I'd love for you to give a like, and if you know someone who's dealing with battles with their children, you could share this information. Sometimes a simple video or text can provide the spark someone needs to change the way they relate to their loved ones. Remember, no one is free from making mistakes, neither parents nor children. The important thing is that, as mothers or fathers, we set an example of managing conflict in a mature way. Yes, we need respect, but we can also make it easier for our children to respect us by listening to them, giving them space, and showing them clearly we won't tolerate hurtful behavior. With patience, perseverance, and proper boundaries, you'll likely see an improvement in your family communication. And although it may be tough at first and meet resistance, those small steps add up. Every conversation in which you manage to stay calm and assertive is a step forward toward a stronger and, ultimately, more loving relationship. Finally, don't forget how important it is to care for your own well-being throughout this process. Do activities that build you up emotionally. Go for walks, join a reading group or an art class, practice meditation, spend time with friends who bring you positive energy, anything that helps you cultivate the inner peace you'll reflect in your family interactions. When your children see that you won't back down to their outbursts and that you remain conciliatory, it's only a matter of time before they become curious and, if all goes well, eventually approach you with a different attitude. In short, you deserve respect. That's undeniable. But the way to regain that respect isn't through forceful shouting or manipulation. It's by showing you're an adult who values yourself, who listens, who empathizes, but who won't allow abuse. Sometimes that balance takes practice, because we come from a culture where the father or mother just gave orders, or, on the other end, where the child takes over and the parent doesn't know how to react. Don't worry if you slip up along the way. The important thing is that you keep trying and learn from each experience. Every family is different, and yours has its own story. Even so, these general strategies of communication, boundaries, and self-respect tend to work in most cases. Thank you so much for reading this far. I hope some of what I've shared motivates you to try changing the dynamic with your children and helps ease tensions that have been causing hurt for a long time. If you feel like it, let me know in the comments. Which of these 6 ways feels most relevant to you right now, or which one you'd like to try first? Remember, it's never too late to heal relationships and restore the harmony that every family deserves. Until the next video, and take good care of yourself.